Star Wars. Once, the very name inspired happiness and joy in its fan base. Star Wars. Once the name inspired the imaginations of people the world over. Star Wars. Once it seemed like the franchise would have no end. Once it seemed like Star Wars would go on forever. 10 years ago, Star Wars had its concept expanded upon. You see, you could only have Luke and the Big Three fighting all the various Imperials or Yuuzhan Vong for so long. And so the various people behind Star Wars thought, well, what if we went 100 years into the future and see just what was going on there? And thus, Star Wars Legacy was born, and I absolutely hated it. It was just more of the same, sadly. The new characters were not interesting in the slightest, and ultimately I read the first 3 issues and was done. Until I discovered a one-shot comic at my local half-price books. And upon discovering that comic, I learned that perhaps Star Wars Legacy had something to offer after all. Good day, ladies and gentlemen. Military science fiction is one of my favorite genres of all time. You got the greatness of science fiction crossed with lovely big guns. Also, I find that the characters in military science fiction are a little more relatable than general science fiction. Star Wars at one time was able to mix science fantasy and military science fiction fairly well. This particular comic we're looking at today is very much a military science fiction comic. Today, we are taking a look at Star Wars Legacy Issue 4, Noob. Star Wars Legacy started up in 2008 and featured the descendants of the Big Three and had a new conflict, Sith versus Imperial. Now, you got a new Sith leader named Darth Krayt. Basically, Space Stalin with just a whiff of Space Hitler, but definitely more Stalin than Hitler. He was your basic evil overlord character that was somewhat intelligent at first, and he had a good idea in creating the One Sith. Essentially, he decided that the Sith needed to go back to basics, and he formed a Sith order that he called the One Sith, because there was only one Sith, not a bunch of individual Sith lords. Everyone was supposed to be equal in some way, but in all reality they were about as equal as people were under Stalin. The concept of the One Sith was borrowed from Khan's Dark Brotherhood seen in the novel Darth Bane: Path of Destruction. Krayt then had a break with the Empire, who at the time was ruled by Imperator Roan Fel, the descendant of Jagd Fel and Jaina Solo. And thus, 100 years on, the Empire and the Sith are engaged in a massive conflict for the galaxy. One of the most enduring images of Star Wars is the Stormtrooper. Who cannot love that epic white armor and that fearsome countenance? Some mock that the Stormtroopers can't hit anything, but that is just the story, ladies and gentlemen. You have to accept this, because if the Stormtroopers hit all the time, the movie would be over in 15 goddamn minutes, and who wants to watch that? In the Star Wars EU, there have been a number of stories focused on the clone troopers of the Clone Wars, most notably the novel series by Karen Traviss known as Star Wars Republic Commando. But the Stormies have not been so lucky. There were some Stormtrooper characters seen in the novel Survivor's Quest, but they have not really had their share of the limelight. And now in the modern era, the Stormies are less highly trained shock troops and more B-1 battle droids. The cover for Star Wars Legacy Noob could be better. A lot better. It's just a squid, Quarren Sith brandishing a BDSM whip and a single-bladed lightsaber with 2 stormtroopers flanking him, and the background is just blank gray. Remember the old adage of not judging a book by its cover? Well, you need to do that here. What really drew me to the comic was the fact that it was a Stormtrooper story, and unlike with the rest of the Legacy series, I was not disappointed. The comic opens with Anson, reference to father of science fiction Robert Anson Heinlein, Trask trying to find his squad. He accidentally bumps into Darth Melval. Trask is understandably freaked out. Remember, the Sith rule by fear like the Soviets did, and thus a lowly trooper does not simply ask directions from a Sith Lord. Thankfully, Sergeant Harkis pulls his ass out of the fire. This is a one-shot comic, and the writer had to be quick and concise when characterizing his characters. As such, we know that Harkis is a good guy when he says that he bawled Trask out to distract Melval from Trask's impertinent question. The rest of Joker Squad are equally as cool as Harkis. You got the hot chick with the big gun that, despite being super tech, is actually worse than the infantry automatic rifle. Then you got Hondo Carr, the cool guy with the knife, and the squad introductory scene is fun, and all the characters are nice.
An odd concept, I know. In the modern era, the squad always seems to be filled with psychopaths or just straight up assholes that never show the main character any respect. It's refreshing to actually see, human beings.
Joker Squad's mission is to go to a planet where their fellow stormtroopers are in revolt. Since the Sith want the planet intact, they simply cannot use an orbital bombardment. It's just a little throwaway line, but it shows that the writer respected the audience enough to at least justify using dropos instead of dropping rocks. The battle on the planet is cool and really shows off the great artwork. Eventually, the lieutenant of the squad is given an ultimatum by Darth Melval: kill his rebellious brother or face death himself.
At first glance, this looks really dumb, and it is, but it is not unrealistic. The Sith rule by fear alone. They don't rule by respect or rule of law or anything like that. They rule by fear. You have to be afraid of them all the time. And due to this, they have to do things that are really dumb like this so that their positions are reinforced.
The comic concludes in the most epic of ways. Melval, of course, goes to kill the lieutenant, but Hondo Carr, the cool knife guy, sneaks up and tries to stab him in the back. But he is too slow, and Melval uses his BDSM whip on him. But then, Anson Trask shoots that tyrannical bastard in the back.
Trask is an excellent audience surrogate character. Since this comic is more or less for fans, he's not constantly asking stupid questions like, what's a Sith? What's the Force? What's a blaster rifle? And really, his inexperience comes from the fact that he is a noob, or an FNG.
Unlike in other media, Trask is not a natural-born soldier and has to learn how to be one. But he's not completely useless either, and having him deliver the final blow on Melval shows that Trask can be a badass without forcing the other characters to lower themselves to make Trask look good. And the comic ends with the Sarge being taken away to get patched up after getting hurt in the fighting, and Trask goes to meet the replacement for Joker Squad. And here we see that Trask is no longer just a noob, but a pro MLG when he tells the overzealous newbie to calm down and focus on staying alive. The end. This comic is short, sweet, and to the point. In just a few pages, we get some great characterization and great character development. Trask and the Jokers are great characters, and while they are simple archetypes, they give the audience the characters that they actually want. It really cannot be overstated how well the writing works in this particular comic. It goes a long way towards finally humanizing the stormtroopers. It does not just treat them as interchangeable cogs in the Imperial machine, and actually shows them as being legitimate human beings. Each character in the comic actually has a legitimate backstory, and there's so much going on in just a few short pages that you would think this comic was longer than it really is. This is Star Wars at its best.
I highly recommend giving this comic a read, as it is good from start to finish. And so, I am GeneralLotz wishing you good Rogue Squadron, and good Shadows of the Empire, or whatever makes you happy.
If you enjoyed my review of Star Wars Legacy #4 Noob, please consider subscribing, and if you can, please consider supporting me on Patreon so that I can continue bringing you these awesome comic reviews.